David, am I allowed to start with my favorite bit of City on the Edge?
I didn't expect that, but yeah, of course, you can do what you
Well,
want.
I appreciate the leeway, sir. This is a little bit into the third act. My left hand was now useless. So limp, I knew my wrist was broken, and there was an odd feeling of pressure in my upper arm, like the elastic of a balloon plus a burning sensation. I scooted backward along the concrete with my feet. I was not close enough. I was not close to being fast enough. I felt blood gushing down my arm. When I saw it, I felt sick, but adrenaline must have kicked in because even though I thought I would pass out, I didn't. I tried to push myself up with my right arm. I saw Tawfiq grab the machete and raise it again. I never understood what the nearness of death meant until that moment when he raised the machete to finish me off. So where are we here, David? What's the setting? What's the city?
It's Beirut, Lebanon, around 1972, 73, during the beginning of the civil unrest. We were actually, my father was assigned there as a foreign service officer, and we were evacuated around 1975 when it started to go full scale. But it's a reflective piece of not even close to being autobiographical, although there are a lot of things that are in the book that did happen to me. And it's a 12-year-old boy who's living in Beirut at the time with his family.
What do you remember about Beirut at that time, and how did it inform this novel? How did you use it as the foundation?
Beirut's always been with me. I think it's one of the most incredible places I've ever lived, and most memorable place. This is a book Ryan, I think you know, there's always a book that you really always want to write, and you probably wanted to write forever. I mean, I wanted to write this one since my 20s, and I've tried in different formats, and it all sucked. After the trilogy, it's not like I wanted a departure or anything like that. It's just that it felt right. I was thinking about Beirut and looking at pictures in my yearbook, and I just came up with this idea about a mystery behind it. You know, just putting in this fictitious kid and fictitious family, and adding a mystery in this setting. You know, in this turbulent setting, and you know,
and that's when it clicked.
And it clicked, and I was fortunate. I am fortunate enough to have an incredible editor who just said, "Yeah, go write it," you know, and he loved it, you know.
Why now? I mean, apart from the fact that it finally clicked, why do you think it took so long? I mean, if this was always a book you wanted to write, why now?
I don't think it could have happened any other time. I mean, I really, you know, I have a collaborative arrangement with my editor, and I learned a lot. My skills were honed at Mulholland, and my skills were also honed as a police detective, writing 40 to 80-page affidavits, you know. But it was just the right time. It had nothing to do with what was going on in the news. In fact, when I first started writing it, the Middle East really wasn't still isn't that popular, I don't think. There's a lot of really, I don't mean popular in that sense. It's just there's so many terrible things happening there now, and especially now with it's almost never changing. But it was just the right timing and the right time, and it felt right, and I got the right opening, actually, and that's when it felt right.
Now, you've already mentioned the main character, 12-year-old Graham, why was he the right way into this story? Why was he the right conduit, to bring the reader into early 1970s Beirut?
I don't think there really was any other way to do it. I didn't think of it as coming of age or anything like that. I wanted the mystery element. I was very influenced by The Body, and what Stephen King did there. It became Stand By Me, and how he created such camaraderie and suspense with going to a distant location, walking to a distant location to see a dead body. And I always loved that idea, that creating suspense, for me, it was sort of in reverse, but just having a grand adventure in such a terrible atmosphere, because if you look back at it now, it was terrible. There was death behind all those explosions. There were, all the sounds of gunfire. There was death behind it. But having the 12-year-old kid and that innocence, I wanted it to be more of an adventure, but also show that what was happening really wasn't all that good.
Yeah. Well, I think you're extremely successful with that. And one of the things that makes the book feel like an adventure, certainly for the main character, and then for the reader as an extension of that, is the fact that you have, I would say, a series of fairly serious adults with really interesting backgrounds and life experiences who have been through difficult things, whether it was the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and they make conscious choices to shield the children from what's happening, or they make it an adventure. There's a particularly memorable moment in the first third of the book where, man, I don't want to give spoilers, but a few adults take a dangerous situation, what could be a very scary, dangerous situation for three young boys, and instead they turn it into an adventure and something that everybody has to take care of together with teamwork. And that was definitely one of my favorite moments of the book. But I think it also kind of builds into, I mean, I know you say you don't want to talk about it potentially being a coming of age story, but given the age of the narrator and given what we know about what he becomes, in some ways it's amazing to think of this young man as someone who will be a cop one day. And as a result, I couldn't help reading some elements of this book very strongly as if his future career was being built into him. His experiences would influence these decisions he made later in his life, and even potentially make him a better police officer. I mean, how did your own background and your own career as a law enforcement officer, influence your decision to bring that in and make older Graham also a cop?
I've always wanted two things in life, and I took different paths in life. I mean, several different paths, but I always wanted to be in law enforcement. But I always wanted to be a writer, and I took that path into law enforcement late in life. So in some way, I think with everything I write, there's always going to be a cop element, like either a retired cop or, and again, I write based on experience, and I wanted this guy to be familiar with death and as he reflects back, and that's, I think there's a part where I don't remember where it is, where you always remember your first body, and I just like the idea of him looking back, but then him being a police detective, because I have to have that element in it, that I'm comfortable there.
Mm-hmm. I think that's also what I found so fascinating, though, because it's as if this key building block, this brutal reality of life, is shown to him at such a young age that it can't help but be formative.
Yeah, it shapes you.
It,
Yeah. And
now,
believe it or not, my father did shape me, and in a lot of ways. You know, he was always in more than I think he was. I mean, there were guns, you know, not shown to us. I mean, I was taught how to shoot a gun and how dangerous a gun was when I was, you know, probably like 13 years old. And I always wondered why he had to have, you know, a gun with him at all times. And, but I learned how to respect it very early on. You know, I mean, I appreciate diving right into it, but I just want to say, you know, I mean, I'm a huge fan, Ryan, and I'm so pleased that you're doing this, because I had the opportunity of reading, you know, the galley of the system, and I was just freaking blown away. I mean, how you, it was, and I'm a former, because you have no law enforcement training.
I do not.
No, I mean, but you nailed it. And for me, I mean, and my, you know, and cop buddies I recommended it to and stuff like that, you know, for us to read it and say, wow, you know, that's like, I think the biggest compliment that we could give a writer, you know, because it was so real. And I knew you always worked in prison reform. I'm big into prison reform, especially with respect to the way they treat substance abusers, and how they're housed with murderers and rapists and stuff like that. They should be. This is a whole different topic I'm getting into, but I just want to say I was really impressed.
Thank you, sir. I can't tell you what it means to me, because I think with obviously the types of subject I write about, not having a career background in some of the things that I write about, because obviously I write fairly broadly, it's incredibly important that I get the details right. It's incredibly important that I can convince someone like yourself and your colleagues as well who've read the book. I'm really lucky, you know, to be perfectly honest. You know, I don't think, you know, yeah, my name's on the cover, but I mean, you already mentioned a collaborative relationship with your editor. Look, no writer is on their own. You know, we are really a collection of, you know, what we've experienced. We're a collection of people who are willing to talk to us, help us, guide us. That's absolutely true in my case. And I think one of the things that helped the system, believe it or not, is that it took so darn long to write. It took 6 years.
Wow.
To write. And I had to take a break in the middle, but I not only got to spend almost a year and a half with a truly legendary parole agent out here in Southern California, but I was also able to spend some time with a pretty incredible sheriff down in Louisiana who used to work narcotics, as well as tons of undercover stuff. And it was really fascinating to work with him, because I think even though it was for a different book and a different project, everything he was teaching me, you know, felt applicable to a law enforcement mentality, to looking at things as cases. And yeah, I just try to build on it. You know, obviously I've spent, you know, almost a decade now with, actually more than a decade, with former gang members here in South Central Los Angeles. So getting it right as best as I possibly can is really what it's all about.
Yeah, and in a way, you're like an editor to them, and right. I mean, in that with what they're writing and sharing, and it's a very collaborative effort on your part, I think, to, you know, when you're working with them.
It can be. I mean, certainly the case with my Pen America work, you know, absolutely, as a prison writing mentor. And I have another mentorship coming up now that I'm really excited about. Just potentially having an opportunity to share, you know, where I'm coming from and what I've been able to accomplish with other writers. I mean, that's the point, at least for me. I've been incredibly lucky to get to this point and be able to sit here with you and talk about your own work. And I wanted, I have to pivot. You'll have to forgive me. I'm also feeling a little bit shy talking about myself, but you named the main character Graham. And I think I know why, but I'm just curious why you did that, and if it's an homage of sorts to another writer.
Yeah, Graham Greene. I mean, I grew up with a father who was a reader, an avid reader. He's still alive, and but where he's living now in the remote north of Minnesota, couldn't bring all his books, so he left a lot of the books with me. And I mean, I have almost every paperback of Graham Greene, but he would always read stuff like Power and the Glory, and stuff like bedtime stories to when I was like 10, 11.
That's an education, sir.
Yeah, that's a dark education, but it was just, I think he liked hearing it aloud in a way. I'm sure if Audible existed back then, he would be into Audible books because he likes hearing it, and I think that allowed him to not only hear it, but I don't know if it was really sharing. Well, yeah, I'd like to think it was sharing one of his favorite authors, I mean, his spy collection is phenomenal. Jean Le Carré, I mean, all the early stuff. And I mean, I got into Maj Showell and Per Wachlu. I had the whole 10-book series, hardcover, 10-book series. Wow. I still have it. And that taught me how you can take like a setting, first of all, like Stockholm, Sweden. And for me, it was Washington, D.C. in the trilogy. And then now Beirut, and try to make that as much of the character, as the characters. And I'm sure, I know you're familiar with the books, and it was, just a 10-year period of time during the life of Martin Beck, a detective, during all in sort of real time, during all the time when there was all the trouble in Stockholm with migrants, and I mean, and stuff that was going on politically in the city at the time. So I learned a lot from those books, how you can just take something so simple and make it suspenseful and beautifully written. So that's what I grew up with. And Graham Greene, was a very powerful influence. Me, I write nothing like him, but I mean, I could easily plagiarize him.
Don't say that too loud.
No, I get caught. It would never get to publication. You know that. I mean, hey, David, what the heck are you doing? What's this?
I've read this before.
Yeah, no, this is brilliant. Wait a minute.
Oh man, can we jump back slightly? I mean, you said you always wanted to be a writer. Can we make it? Let's take a step back. Let's make it even more basic than talking about specific books of yours. Can you walk me through your process of writing a novel?
The first novel, and this is just going back a little bit. First novel I wrote when I was 17. It was called The Apple Tree. It was 389 pages. First rejection I got, I was 18. And I swear to this day, I've got to find the letter because I swear it was Little Brown and Company. And it was a vicious editor because I got torn apart. But I think at the time, if she would have known I was a 17-year-old at that time, and then 18 with the rejection-year-old kid, maybe she would have been a little kinder. But I didn't write again for a long time. And then I got my degree in film and always wanted to be a screenwriter, but that was always too formulaic. Now, when I write, I'm having a hard time with it's getting better. The pandemic, we're getting better. A lot of people are getting vaccinated, and it's getting better. So I'm able to get out more. But I was having a hard time writing because of it. But I would always I always have my place, and it's my recliner. I have a beautiful desk. I have all that stuff, but I never write on the desk. I write on my recliner, and always specific time. And whether something happens or not, I'm there, And for me, it's I have to meet a threshold. And for me, it's like 10,000 words. Once I hit like 10,000 words, it's like gold, then it's just, then it goes. And I try not. It
takes over.
Yeah. And I try, I let it take its own life. And a lot of times the ending I have in my mind is not the ending that happens, But I also used to get caught up in like perpetual editing, where I'd like to know this about you too. Like what I would do is the next day I'd go back and I'd start at the beginning, and then just keep rewriting. And then I finally realized, just go back a chapter and you can rewrite later, and I'd never finish a book,
Yeah.
because of that.
It's an easy place to get stuck.
Yeah. What about
Unfortunately.
you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I would say when it comes to that particular topic, I've learned that I'm unfortunately so much of a perfectionist and someone who is prone to overthinking. I think most writers are. Yeah, if you let me go back, I'll write the same book forever. There was a time actually in my career, I started very young. My first book was published in England when I was, goodness gracious, 22, 23
Jeez.
years old.
Baby.
Yeah, just a little guy. The next book I wrote was Kung Fu High School, and that was my first book in the US. We sold it to the Weinstein Company in a relatively major deal, and I just, as a very young, dumb kid, I thought, this is my life. This is what it's going to happen every time I write a book. It's just going to be great and amazing. And then I spent 8 years writing a follow-up. And I can tell you, David, with all honesty, and it even hurts to say this, I rewrote that thing 3 times. And at one point it was, goodness gracious, it was 200,000 words.
Oh my God.
So 1,200 pages, 1,100 pages, something really bizarre and stupid. I got, to be perfectly honest, I got lost in the material, and it really dragged me down. But I will say this, in retrospect, it was the most incredible education, because I learned how not to write a long book.
Some people can get away with it. I think Infinite Jest or something, but I mean,
sure,
I can't get away.
Trust me, I can't. I'm not that guy. I'm not that writer. And learning how to put a hook at the end of a chapter and write short chapters is one of the smartest things that I've ever learned. And I definitely recognize that in your writing. It's one of the things I appreciate so much about your writing is like, man, it just makes me trust you more. It makes me relax. Like, man, David has this. He's going to pique my attention again. He's going to hook something. He's going to give me just a little bit more of this mystery just to keep me moving forward. And I can't tell you how many times I smiled in City on the Edge, where you gave me like a 2-page chapter, a 1.5-page chapter. I love that, because I feel like
I do that for myself more than anybody.
It works for me too. No, I get it. And I think you have to do it as a writer. But I think that also comes from potentially, and definitely yell at me if you think I'm incorrect, but I think it comes from an understanding of the reading process.
Mm-hmm.
I think every writer worth their salt knows that it's difficult to feel lost or bogged down in a book, or like you're not moving forward.
Yeah, no, yeah, I learned that too. I mean, that's actually, I do it. That's why I do it for myself, is because that's the kind of reader I am. And
well, I can tell you, it. Sorry to jump in, but I recognize that, and that it just makes me happy. And I always feel like, it doesn't matter if it's Trigger, it doesn't matter if it's City on the Edge. Like when I'm reading your work, I always feel like I'm moving forward. And I always feel like you know what you're doing, and you're going to take me to the right place. But it's cool to hear that you don't always know how it's going to end. That you let the book take over, you let the plot and the characters do their thing. And then I'd imagine you mold it and you edit it when you get to the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a perfectionist too. I mean, but I don't do outlines. I mean, that's what I was curious with you is for the system. I mean, did you do an outline? Was it, or do you just go by the scruff of your neck?
Okay, let's see how to admit this. I used to outline like a crazy person. That book that took 8 years never saw the light of day. At one point, my US agent actually fired me after he started reading it. It was so bad. I really got lost in that rabbit hole. I outlined the heck out of that thing. Nowadays, I don't. I have a sense of what needs to move forward. I really, as I write books that tend to use multiple perspectives, I have a sense of when the baton needs to be passed so that we can get new information or try to drive the story forward by, leaving a dramatic question with the reader, right? Like a chapter builds up and builds up and builds up and something's about to happen. And I stop the chapter, I write a new one. It's from a different perspective. It's possibly in a different timeline. And the audience is, oh, wait, what's going to happen? Ideally, that doesn't upset them. They stick around. And so, we'll get different pieces throughout. But as crazy as it is to admit, with 12 narrators, I didn't actually outline any of the system. I just went with my gut and what felt right from the character perspective. And I felt it was important not to lose sight of the fact that it's really about the case. It's really about, these two young men who've been accused of a crime, one guilty, one innocent. We really need to stick with them. But any other bits of plot information and, mysterious elements, like they needed to be weaved in so that we can still be moving forward.
I think my favorite passage was, and the book is in actually the loft office, but my favorite passage was where the drug dealer got shot, and then the name is escaping me, but where they go back and to the fallen body and get the drugs out of her pocket. I mean, that was so real. I mean, that's true. That is exactly what would happen. I mean, that they wouldn't leave the scene without, knowing what was there, a real addict, that was powerful.
Yeah, that was Scrappy. Thank you, sir. That Scrappy, the drug dealer, Augie.
Yeah, that's right.
The addict who was trying to get a hit from her earlier. And here's the best part, those of you who are watching, this happens in like chapter 2. So there are no spoilers there whatsoever.
Oh yes, gosh, I didn't think about that. I shouldn't have said it. I just spoiled part of it. No,
you're great. That's literally the crime that drives the book. One guy was there, one guy was not. It starts with an alibi, which was actually a suggestion from my agent. He said, well, if you really want us to know somebody's innocent, why don't you just start with his alibi? I thought, oh my gosh, that's great.
Yeah.
So I stole it.
That's cool how that works though. I mean, my agent and Josh, my editor, I mean, they do the same thing. I mean, that's great. Like there was a scene in the second girl where he was stepping into the river and the river became like a mouth, the mouth of the river. I mean, my editor suggested that, and I go, well, I'm taking that. I mean, that's mine now. Sorry. And he goes, yeah, that's,
You made it your own.
Yeah, no, I did make it my own. I mean, definitely. He didn't write it. No. But no, that is so cool.
My ear grabbed it.
Yeah. No, but that is so cool that, you have that, that same type of collaboration,
Oh, big time. And I think with no one more than my wife, actually, who used to work at the DA's office here in Los Angeles, has a criminal law background, is extremely savvy with progression of cases, understands drug court really well. All of that played a huge role in basically in anything I write. She's always reading it.
No,
thankfully.
Read something.
Sometimes yes, sometimes, but I think she's trained me well by this point. I've written 3 books in the world. I listen every time she's giving me criticism, and it was actually really fascinating because the system ends with a trial, right? There's this big trial, and I can't tell you, David, like years and years and years, I've heard her just yell at the television and be upset when TV and films just get, court proceedings wrong.
Yeah.
And so I had internalized all that. But the best part was she said, I know you think you internalized that, but I'm sending you to court. And so I went and I observed a gang conspiracy trial near the very end of the research process. And I actually, the judge, was very kind to kind of talk me through things and let me sit in. And it was fairly long. I mean, most trials in LA don't last more than 2 or 3 days, just because there are so darn many. They need to crunch through them. But this one was almost 2 weeks.
Was Rico? Was it was a Rico case? Conspiracy?
No, it was mainly.
Because those
It was conspiracy, but there were a few other elements there, and there was a wiretap, and they had thousands upon thousands of text messages. And it was fascinating to me because so much of the trial hinged on what the accused, said were the definition of certain words, and what law enforcement said were the definition of certain words. And I just thought, wow, this is really amazing that I go to a trial where it's all about semantics. And I think it came down to, I believe two of the defendants were found guilty, but another one was found innocent. And I think ultimately the jury ended up believing what her lawyer said about, what some of these words meant. And it was slang, and I think you would have found it fascinating. I mean, your ear for dialogue, your dialogue in the DC books is just to die for. I was just blown away. I felt like, oh my, this is a class. This is fascinating to hear, law enforcement and lawyers and gang members argue over who owns a word, what the meaning of it is, what it means, and how it potentially points to a crime or does not.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah. I don't think if I had not experienced the years in law enforcement that I did, I would not be even close to being good at dialogue. Part of my job too was through the Department of Justice. I was called in for interview and interrogation on some major cases and stuff, and just being in the box with those people for hours, just talking to them and listening to them, and just hearing their story. I mean, that's real meaningful. I mean, that just, it sticks with you, and how everyone, there's certain commonality with a lot of the stories, especially with respect to those who are addicted to substance abuse. I mean, that's very common how they fell into it, and then how they go to prison and they end up coming out sicker than they were. Some stories are good. I mean, not many. I mean, maybe a very, very small percentage of the stories are good. But I just listened, and I loved more than anything, like when I was waiting for a trial, or and I had to kill like 2 hours, just going and sitting in another one, and just having my I had 2 notebooks. I had a writing notebook and I had a police notebook.
Nice.
Because I didn't want one to. Well, actually, now that I said it, I might like have to give that up. But
you might be in trouble.
No, I'm not gonna be in trouble, because I never, I just like came up with ideas and would write the ideas down. But it was more than anything just listening to the whole court and the whole court atmosphere was phenomenal.
I can't tell you how happy it makes me to hear you say that, because sometimes I think when you read someone's work, you get to know them in some capacity. And I think, this is the first time we've ever met, but I've gotten to know you through your fiction. And honestly, like the first thing I would have said is, man, David's a listener. He's a listener, but he doesn't just listen to what's being said. He listens to why it's being said, how it's being said. Is there a motive behind it? Obviously, this hints at your background and your professional experience, but I really related to it, because I can't tell you how many times I've sat down. And it doesn't matter if I'm at a festival in France. Well, when such things were occurring, and people would say, "Oh yeah, when you sit down with people, do you just write down their stories?" And I say, "No, absolutely not." My role, such as I see it, is to understand the schematics of how these communities work, how these subcultures work, especially criminal subcultures. I'm there to learn background, and most importantly, I'm there to learn rhythm. The rhythms of how things occur, and how they can progress, so that I can, once I understand beginning, middle, and end, I can create my own stories in those types of molds that will ideally convince someone who's grown up in that world, or who has policed in that world, or has tried cases in that world. So, I don't know where Patricia went. I don't know if we have questions coming in. I want to be, oh, hi, Patricia. So I definitely want to be open to, if we're having audience questions coming in. I do have one more question for David, but I'm happy to hold it if we have some.
Oh, please go right ahead. I'll just be here in the wings.
Okay. That was almost magical. I love it.
Magic.
This might be a bit personal, David, but I've always wondered this, and maybe I'm showing my own cards because of how I'm asking this question. But how do you think your own experiences of violence form how you write about it?
I guess authentically. I mean, I don't want to get anything wrong. I mean, I've seen people die in front of me. I mean, I've seen what happens to the eyes, and and stuff like that. So it's influenced me incredibly. I mean, it is very true that you remember your first body all the time, and so I just want to get it right. So if there's a fight sequence, or there's something like that, I want to get it right.
Mm-hmm. I think what sets you apart, if I may say so, is you also focus on the consequences. You give us that sense that even if it's a small burst of action, it has lasting consequences. There are, I think Graham, I don't think I'm ruining anything, but he gets multiple casts, on an arm throughout the book. And I loved that, as someone who has been through a number of things myself, and the healing process is, at least for me, was so much worse than the moment when violence occurred.
Especially in the 70s. It would be, nowadays I think it's, I just got out of the hospital getting a, tumor removed from the spine of my neck. And my surgery was a month and a half ago. And I mean, I've got a rod and 6 screws, and it's amazing. But if I had that surgery in the 70s, I mean, I'd be in like, I'd have like a brace on my head, like keep me like this, But yeah, I had an experience where I broke my leg in the 70s, and I went through like 4 or 5 casts. I had to have my leg broken,
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And the details just felt so real to me in the book. So I'm not surprised at all to hear that. I mean, even the details of what an old cast looked like, the color, it was very evocative. And I think it cuts into that authenticity that you're talking about.
Well, thank you.
Of course. I mean, that means a lot to me. Oh, Patricia's back.
Hi. Well, I love this conversation, and I think our audience is, they've got to just feel like they've sat down at a full 15-course meal, because it's wonderful, and I know we're enjoying it. Just some questions. One question that has come up, and it's about David, your time in Beirut. When did you live in Beirut, and how did that experience shape City on the Edge? Final part of that, have you been back?
Oh, that's good. Actually, no, I've not been back. I want to go back really bad. They've rebuilt it, and I've heard they rebuilt it better. And there's been civil wars there for generations, and they've rebuilt the city. It was a Paris of the Middle East, and it's Paris of the Middle East now. I was there from 71 to 74 or 75. It's not even really, I'd have to look at my yearbooks. The city I talk about in City on the Edge, the Beirut I talk about, is the 70s Beirut. I have not been back to research because it wouldn't be the same. I mean, a lot of the buildings aren't there. They've been blown up. except for the Phoenician Hotel and a few other hotels and the Riviera Hotel. I heard those are still standing. We lived behind the Riviera Hotel where the book takes place. There actually was a road that went to the Corniche, and the Corniche is an avenue that just spans the whole seawall. From, I think it goes as far as, I may be wrong. I mean, someone correct me, but in the audience if they know Beirut, how far you can travel along the Corniche. But the first part of the question was how I was impacted.
When did you live there?
Yeah,
and how did that experience shape City on the Edge?
Oh, it totally shaped it. I mean, without having lived there during that time, before and during the trouble. I mean, before being free to really, I mean, I broke curfews, and went out and did stupid things. And, because my father was working, my mother was never really around. But before the curfews and before the trouble, we were kids in sandals and shorts and shirtless, just, walking around everywhere, going uptown, getting shawarmas. And, I call them Lebanese pizzas. I forget what they really are, but they're like a pita bread pizza. They're phenomenal. And just the smells, this are still with me, including Stinky Steps, which is real. So the location is real. I mean, there's nothing fictional as far as the locale. I mean,
when the two of you, David and Ryan, when you're creating place, what do you have to do to get yourself into that almost like you're talking about an olfactory memory there? What did the two of you do to get yourselves into that place? David, would you mind starting?
Me, I fall into it. I just naturally fall into it based on memories and stuff. And sometimes I do have to not refresh my memory, but I have to get the feeling back of like in Washington, D.C., I'd go on a ride around with a buddy or something like that, or just drive around in my car and just sit like I was in surveillance or something, and just sit and just watch people and just drive. The city's different for me. I mean, so the Washington, D.C. I write about is in the early 2000s, and or not the early 2000s, the 2000s, and it's really in the 90s. It is really, really changed. It's not the same city. I mean, but there's still stuff. Everything that's happening is pretty much in the shadows now.
Ryan, what about you?
I search for details. I'm an outsider in Los Angeles. I'm originally from Colorado. So I also have a phenomenally poor long-term memory. Like my short-term memory is very sharp, thankfully, but my long-term memory, I frequently have family members who say, how do you not remember this? And, I could have been 12, 13, 14 years old. I have no idea. It's just gone. I've overwritten it like an old computer hard drive somehow. But when it comes time, when it comes to evoking place, like, so with All Involved in particular, which is set during the 1992 LA riots, I spent almost 2 years with people who had extremely vivid experiences of that time. And it was fascinating to hear what they remembered. One of the things that I heard again and again was the smell of smoke, the smell of burning tires, things like that. Los Angeles to me though, and I think this plays through to the system and to SAFE, it's such an incredibly diverse city. It really is a globe in 5,000 square miles. We have almost every language on earth represented here, almost every culture on earth, and finding a way into that, at least for me, is mainly through food. So I always try to weave food and taste and smell into my work, because I think it grounds a piece. I think it ideally gives the reader something else to kind of imagine and hang on to and play with. But I can just specifically say for myself, I had a really bad experience when I was 17 years old. I was hit in such a way that it tore my nose out. I had to have 2 facial reconstructive surgeries, and I lost the ability to smell and taste for a little over a year. And the doctor who fixed me the second time basically said, well, good luck. Like the nerve damage was so extensive, we have no idea if you'll smell or taste again. Thankfully, I can, but I have a completely different perspective on it now. And it's really how I understand the world, how I learn about culture, how I connect with people. And I just try to find a way to weave that into the books and also give some insight into character. So it doesn't matter if it's, the character of Little, and his mother cooking Guatemalan food for one of the main characters. It doesn't matter if it's, Safe and, the characters going for tacos or tamales. I think, finding that way to connect to this extremely human need for food, for sustenance, and weave it into a book. At least for me, it just makes it feel more real, but it also feels grounded for the world and the city at large.
One of the things that the two of you reminded me of is how a city can be a place and a character at the same time, and recreating that almost like a city has a pulse. And I definitely see that if you think about those films that have the like Koyaanisqatsi, where the city looks like arteries, where the traffic lanes are, and the red tail lights. It looks like it's pulsing blood. And the documentary that's out now on Vice about iSniper, about Malvo and the DC sniper, that's recreating a place, Washington, D.C., as a place that I really had forgotten during the Iraq War. And I wonder, David, when you're thinking about creating a city and giving us where many of us may never have been, or that time period of a city where we haven't been there, how do you do that, or is that part of your process?
Oh, that's definitely a part of my process. I think Ryan and I talked about that. My major influences, specifically, the Martin Beck series, how with Stockholm, and George Pelecanos, of course, can't go through a conversation about DC without mentioning him, about how he gets the city right. When someone doesn't get the city right. I'm not going to name those very popular authors. There are a lot of them that get it right, but there are a couple that just put southeast and northeast and northeast and northwest, and I don't know where they're getting that information from, and because each quadrant is different. It's its own life, and so I like how you said it. I want the city to have a pulse, to have a heart, and to not to just be a background.
I think it's really easy for a city to just be a backdrop, and I really admire when authors like yourself say, "Oh, this is a character. This is a living, breathing entity." And I think, Ryan, you do that too. And you both have such unique, immersive approaches from your own experiences and your own. I kind of see you as like anthropologists in a way, sometimes doing field work. So I wonder if the two of you are familiar with Jill Leovy's Ghetto Side, that nonfiction book she did about LA. Ryan's about to reach for something. Is that ringing a bell for you, David?
No.
Ghetto Side, a true story of murder in America. Jill Leovy, Leovy.
I will get that, definitely.
I wonder if you'll talk about it, Ryan.
I love it. It's one of my favorite books I've ever read. Given the nature of a lot of my fiction, I have to read a lot of nonfiction. one of the things that I view as my job as an author is not just to do first person and sitting down with the folks who do these jobs, whether it's in the courts, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's folks who used to be gang members, which in a way is a job, especially when bigger, scarier people want things from you, which I think, by the way, is also one of the things that David gets absolutely right in his DC books, and Trigger in particular. Like the just that kind of sinking feeling of those above you who are using you, and when you have no options, there's no way to really stop it, and yet there's this kind of this incredibly sympathetic humanism that runs through David's work as well, that I absolutely love. But with Ghetto Side, I can honestly say it hit me extra hard because I'd already done about 5 years of research about roughly 6 miles south of where a lot of this book takes place. I had heard stories almost exactly like the one that Leovi details in the book. So if anything, it just hit me square in the chest, and it felt true in the deepest, best way. I think that literature feels true. It's a gripping story. It's an incredible mystery, but it never loses sight of the human beings involved. It never loses sight of one of the things that I tend to write about in my work, and maybe I'm giving myself up in terms of theme here, but it's that crime never happens to simply the victim. Crime happens to everyone who has ever loved the victim, cares about the victim. And it's as a result, that crime is like a big rock thrown in a pond, and those ripples, they come out and they just hit everybody. And I think as far as nonfiction is concerned, I think Ghetto Side is probably one of the best books I've ever read on that rippling effect of crime. And I recommend it all the gosh darn time. And I'm so glad you brought it up, Patricia.
I'll have to get that. I did live in LA for 14 years.
I know we need to talk about that at some point, but not today.
That's a private conversation. But I mean, no, it's all good stuff.
If it has to be private, okay, we'll accept that. So the two of you talked about your work and your commitment to prison reform. There's a lot of conversations about that now. And David, if you could first talk about your perspective and your work, and then Ryan, if you could please talk about your work too as a PEN American prison writing mentor. I think that would be a wonderful way for us to talk about what's the change you're wanting to see on the ground. David?
Well, my work, I'm unfortunately not doing much now. I do want to get involved. I mean, now that I'm retired, I have no excuse. A lot of the work I did then, especially with respect to substance abusers and trying to get them into the right program, I think is essential. There are no DC is not a municipality. It's so our prosecutors are the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we have a DC jail, but if they end up going to prison after the trial, they end up going to a federal prison. And I think even in the with a lot of the local prisons and states, they might have, maybe now it's changed, but back then there might be groups or something people can get involved in, but it's really tough to get involved, for them to get involved with special groups, because they can get in a lot of trouble. This comes from their mouths, not mine. But it's just was a political battle, with judges trying to say this guy, should not, or gal should not be housed with rapists and murderers, and I think there should be a whole different system for people with very non-violent crimes. I'm talking about, property crimes specifically, not even burglars. I'm talking below that. dealing with people with substance abuse, because what happens is those people, when they go to prison, they always graduate, you know, and I'm talking about a large percentage of them do. They graduate to you know, bigger things, you know, it's an education, you know, and they learn that they can get away with different things. And so there's always, especially with crack users, there's, you know, you don't really go cold turkey and withdraw off of that. I mean, they have a hard time, but they can stop, you know, but once they start, they can't stop, you know. But when they go to prison, you know, and they don't have money and they want to get something like that, they're going to owe something that you don't want to owe, you know, and then if they end up stopping and cleaning up in prison, once they get out, if there's a trigger, and no, I mean, that's not what my book's about, but if they have a trigger like a death in the family, like something very personal or something like that, they go right back to use. They don't have someone that they can go to, you know. I think once they get, if they do have to go to prison, once they get out, I think they need to go to another facility that is, you know, an open facility, you know, where they can get help.
Ryan, what is your work now as a writing mentor?
Well, I just wanted to speak very briefly about how this plays through into my fiction. So I set the system when I set it in late 1993, early 1994, for a couple reasons. And the first one was to give a sense of how LA City and LA County has changed as a result of those 6 days in 1992. But I also thought it was an absolutely pivotal moment in criminal justice history with the 3 strikes laws coming in. And also, so you've got that harder edge, but you also have the advent of drug court in the state of California. So for the first time ever, beginning to separate along the lines of exactly what David just described, which is, look, if we have a nonviolent offender here who is, you know, in possession, we have to figure out ways to address this, as opposed to sending them to, at the time, and things are better now. But to be perfectly honest, I mean, the 90s were incredibly brutal in the jail and prison system in California. It absolutely was a finishing school, as David described, for criminals. It was extremely easy to graduate. It was extremely easy to learn new things, new grifts, new criminal processes, and even mentalities in some ways, especially if there's further emotional damage or physical damage, or maybe there's a different kind of owing that springs from either joining a gang for protection or being in hock because of continued drug use while still inside. Mm-hmm. It's a phenomenally complicated and complex thing. As far as stepping back from that, potentially being the change I would love to see, I mean, you know, I can say I came at this from an entirely personal angle. You know, I've led a relatively blessed life, all things concerned. But I was a little bit wild as a teenager, and to be perfectly honest, you know, I'm sitting here with y'all right now, but really just through the grace of God. But I think things changed pretty significantly for me about 12 years ago. One of my best friends growing up, his little brother was drunk and made a really stupid mistake. He entered the wrong house the day after Christmas, and he was murdered. He was shot and killed. It wasn't murdered, excuse me, but he was shot and killed. And I think that changed a lot about how I was thinking. That changed a lot about what I wanted to write about. I landed in Los Angeles not long after that. I found myself being part of an art crew out here where almost all of the work we did was in gang neighborhoods. In some cases, we actually had to sit down with the gang and actively negotiate if we wanted to do a mural. And I found it incredibly professional and straightforward and honest in a way that I had never anticipated anything like that would be. But even in difficult areas, I think there's always a sense of ownership. There's always a sense of pride, in some cases potentially misplaced, but in other cases very real, very rooted in heritage. And we needed, you know, as outsiders, we needed to do what we could with that. So I came in on kind of the painting angle. And then as I spent more time with people, just listened and listened and listened, then I started to come up with my own stories and write. And one of the things I learned, I think pretty early on, after spending a tremendous amount of time with folks who had been in jail, who had been in prison, the importance of second chances, the importance of redemption above all else. I can't tell you how many young men and women I met who did really stupid things when they were 16, 17, 18 years old. But by the time they were in their late 20s, in their early 30s, they were ready to have families. They were ready to settle down and work a job and make something of themselves. That just hit me. And one of the other things I know, granted, I grew up in a military family, Air Force, out in Colorado Springs, and I know that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is scarce. And I think nowhere is that more true than in South Central. And nowhere is that more true than in some of the jails and prisons I've been to, whether it's Chino, whether it's San Quentin, whether it's the recently closed Los Padrinos, which is the juvenile facility out here. So I actually started asking my publishers initially, this is how it all started. I said, hey, how can I help? And it was actually my UK publisher who created an event in a prison in Scotland for me. And I came in and we talked about SAFE. This was right when SAFE was published. It was through the Edinburgh Book Festival. And I was at HMP Greenock, Her Majesty's Prison, Greenock, Scotland. And it was the first event with male and female inmates in many, many years. And it just hit me square in the heart, Patricia. I mean, it really did impact me, because I had folks coming up to me saying, man, this is the first normal thing I've done since I've been locked up, and I've been locked up for 8 years. And when the pandemic came on, I knew that by far the most vulnerable population would be folks behind bars. So the initial idea for the system, unfortunately, it was put off and eventually canceled, but was a prison book tour where I would go into prisons with PEN America, and we'd be focused on creative writing work, to give folks as many tools as possible to imagine different possibilities for themselves, starting with fiction. As imagination is a curious door. When you open it and you're willing to go down that path, I think all kinds of things open up for you, purely from a brain perspective. Your brain just starts moving in a different way, and that's been huge. I was a mentor for a number of prison writers through the first PEN America program that ended up with the Bunker Prize, the Eddie Bunker Prize. Eddie was in prison for some time here in California because he was a bank robber. But he came out, made something of himself. Phenomenal writer. If you haven't read any Edward Bunker, oh my goodness, you need to. But actually, one of my mentees won the first prize they gave, which was, oh man, that meant so much to me. And so I took that experience and I talked to my UK publisher again, and I said, hey guys, like, folks are hurting. They're denied access to family because of what's going on with the pandemic. How can we do something, absolutely anything, to create a spark? And they suggested a short story contest. And so I worked with the Reading Agency, which is an incredible nonprofit there in the UK, and we did a nationwide short story program. Just my editor and I reading, oh my gosh, well over 100 entries and picking our top 10. They all were celebrated at a festival in Liverpool a couple weeks ago, and I know it's not much. I know it's small, but I just think that everybody is talented at something. And a lot of folks who come from difficult backgrounds don't always have the space or sense or backing to know exactly what that is. And if I can just help even just a little bit, especially pushing more folks to write and learn more in terms of communication skills, so that the first reaction is perhaps not violence, but it's instead to think about it. Instead, it's to communicate. Well, then, I mean, that's tremendous.
Well, I appreciate the two of you talking about sort of, what's needed and a big structural reform, how to humanize the experience for people, and to emphasize above all that it's possible to have redemption. That's we're talking about
Always.
human beings here. And David, let me ask you as we're closing out. I appreciate y'all staying a little bit over. David, is it unfair to ask you what's next? And it's okay if you want to pass on that question.
No, I'm not, for Ryan, because of Ryan. I'm not going to pass. It takes place in Long Beach.
What?
It's going to be like in 1987 punk noir.
Oh my
gosh!
Club, send it to me right now.
No, if I had even the first paragraph, I would. But it's totally a work in progress in my head right now, and on notes. And it'll involve a PI who's a doorman at an alternative music club. And again, based on experience, because I was a promoter booking agent for one of the most popular ones in Long Beach, California in the 80s. I mean, everyone from the Red Hot Chili Peppers to Social Distortion to, everyone to X. I mean, they all played there.
Oh my gosh, I remember Social Distortion's Ball and Chain, David. Go ahead.
Oh my
You're
gosh,
speaking my language here.
Well, we had
Please.
Hunter S. Thompson in there too, doing a spoken word thing, or evening a conversation with Hunter S. Thompson, and also Timothy Leary, who became a very good friend of mine. So there was a lot going on, and I'd like to try to incorporate those people into it somehow. But that's what I'm working on now.
You have made two people so happy. If you could look at Ryan's face and my face right now, we are so excited. I had a question ready about the whole punk scene, but now I'm satisfied. Now you're going to bring it our way, and we're going to get to savor.
Let's hope I can do it right.
I know you'll do it right, because that's what we have seen tonight, and that's what Ryan has elicited from you, is your capacity for authenticity and for delivering the goods. It's been a pleasure and a real honor to hear from you, David, and to hear from you, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us at Malaprop's bookstore. We are always happy to celebrate and lift up authors. And David Swinson's new book, City on the Edge, is out. Please make sure you check it out, if not at Malaprop's, at your local independent bookstore. I want to congratulate you, David, and thank you, Ryan. I'm delighted you could reach back there, Ryan, and pull out some Ghetto Side. So that's fantastic. David, please join us again, and we can't wait for the 80s punk scene. Bring it to us, please.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us so much tonight. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Thank you. Loved it.